if AI discriminates versus a human, the scalability of the discrimination is far greater than any one individual human can do.
Exactly.
And the other issue, especially when it comes to the age context, is the amount of information that these AI tools give talent acquisition and hiring managers that previously wasn't available in a millisecond. So you think like before, if you don't want to hire, let's say, a female for the job, which of course is highly illegal, you would have to take time to discriminate. You have to go through these resumes. Is this a female sounding name? They go to women's college. Are there any indicators are on there? And it would just throw that resume in the trash. Next, takes time.
Welcome to It Gets Late Early. Today I have Keith Sonderling, who is the Commissioner of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and he is here to tell us all about what his organization does and how the protections work for employees and employers in this great country of the United States of America. So welcome to the show, Keith.
Thank you for having me. So I'm Keith Sonderling, as you just heard, Commissioner of the EEOC. The EEOC is the federal agency in Washington, D.C. that's charged with protecting all workplace civil rights. So when you think of the big ticket items in HR, think of us as the regulator of human resources. The Me Too movement, D&I, all types of discrimination is what my agency enforces and tries to protect. Our mission is to prevent and remedy employment discrimination and advance equal employment for all in the workplace. But a lot of people, unfortunately, only know the EEOC as that law enforcement agency piece, the preventing discrimination. Most HR professionals' experience is, oh no, we got a charge of discrimination from the EEOC. What did we do wrong? And then the lawyers get involved. So, we have another part of our mission, which you just heard, which is equally as important, is promoting equal employment opportunity, ensuring that everyone can enter and thrive in the workforce without being discriminated against. And what's really special about this agency is we were born out of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. So Martin Luther King marching here in Washington, D.C. led to the creation of the Civil Rights Act, which has celebrated its 60th birthday this summer, which then wound up creating the EEOC. So to simplify it, we are the regulator for everything HR in the workplace.
Well, we know we need you. So thank you for being there and doing the work for us. Tell me a little bit about how you work with organizations too, in terms of the education component.
We have a lot of compliance assistance we do. Again, we are a civil law enforcement agency at our core. So, a lot of people don't realize in the United States, for most employment claims, you cannot go directly to court if you work for private sector, state or local government, federal government. You have to come to the EEOC first. So we see every claim of employment discrimination largely in the United States. So within that, we also see what the trends are. And we're also better able to identify what the top issues are that we can put out compliance assistance, that we can put out guidance, that we can do studies on, that we can do reports on to ensure that not only employers have all the tools they need to be able to comply with these very complex federal laws, but also workers have the knowledge of how these laws apply to them. I believe that an educated worker who knows their rights are less likely to sit on their rights and not know they're being discriminated against and go to HR and say, here's the problem, here's what my rights are. It gives the company the ability to then go remedy that. And even too, for an employers, the more they know their obligations, in this area, the more likely they are to comply. But that's largely on us to put out that guidance and information without the legalese so people can actually understand what their rights are and obligations are across the board. Okay.
So what would you say is one of the common misconceptions about the EEOC?
That we're just a law enforcement agency, that we're just, looking to bring cases against employers. Although that is a big part of our job, it's not all about that. It's really ensuring that employment discrimination doesn't happen in advance, so we don't have to remedy it after. So that's what I've been trying to do in speaking to as many communities as I can, just knowing that, for all the issues you face in HR and in compliance, there are a ton of resources for you for free available that the EEOC provides to help you comply with these laws, to ensure your employees have a workplace where they can thrive, and that no protected characteristic such as sex, race, national origin, religion, age, disability plays any factor in any employment decision.
Can you tell me give us a sense of the scope of what the EEOC is dealing with? Like, how many cases do you guys work on every year?
A lot.
What's the breakdown of them?
So like I said before, you have to come to the EEOC first. So we get almost 860,000 potential inquiries of discrimination every year. Now, not everything is discrimination. And like HR departments, you have to deal with kind of sifting through, well, what is actually, just problems with the job versus what is actually violating federal anti-discrimination civil rights law. So out of that, it's around 81,000 charges of discrimination last year. And, that number has consistently bounced around anywhere as high as 100,000 a year to in the low 60,000s a year. But that's just at the federal level. We have state and local partners that also take these cases as well, but that's what we report out on the federal level. But just in the last year, it's increased over 10% in the amount of charges we get in. That's in addition to the litigations we actually file as an agency, which are sometimes, a couple hundred a year as well in federal court. So we're always busy. We always have around 80,000-ish cases cooking that we have to deal with at all of our local offices, and generally a few hundred litigations pending at any time.
Wow. Yeah. And I bet you do have to sift through a lot of education, right? Where it's like, hey, this is actually not discrimination. This is just, like a bad workplace or something that's not a fit for you. And so I imagine there's a lot of education that goes on there and a lot of time. How big's your department?
We have around, I think, close to 60 offices around the country and around a little less than 3,000 employees, but we have to deal with every case of employment discrimination. So like all federal agencies, a lot of work to do and limited resources.
Yeah, sounds familiar. Sounds like corporate employment as well, I would say. And this podcast, as you well know, is very much focused on age discrimination. So I'd be keen to understand exactly, what's the breakdown of the cases that you are working on that have to do with age versus other protected class elements.
Yeah, so age is obviously one of the protected classes of preventing employment discrimination in the U.S. It's one of the many we have to deal with here. But before I tell you what some of the stats are, I think sometimes there's misconception about what age discrimination actually is. And that's something, we try to put out a lot of material to ensure everyone understands. And, I think the most shocking thing to a lot of people in the United States is that the age discrimination starts at 40. And, when that law was passed, 40 was considered towards the part of your career where you could be subject to being laid off because of your age. And obviously, that has changed. Wow. And but that is what the law is here in 2024. If you are the day you turn 40 years old, which I did as an EEOC commissioner, you are now projected.
Welcome aboard.
You are subject to these workplace protections, in addition to all the other ones such as sex, race, and disability. It's kind of interesting. The other protected characteristics, think about your sex, your religion. Disabilities, a lot of those you have the day you start working. And, the age when you sort of get an additional protected characteristics once you're 40. But here's just some of the quick nuances of it is that and by the way, at that 40-year-old number, there are some states out there that have gone less or even eliminated the age requirement.
I saw that.
That is completely up to the states. They just can't raise it. They can't say age discrimination in this state starts at 50, but they're free to lower it or eliminate it altogether. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is that if you are under 40 years old, you have no protection related to your age in the workforce. An employer can go and say, I'm firing you because you just turned 36. I'm firing you because you just turned 21. Happy birthday.
It's wild.
And there's nothing you can do about it because it's just not age discrimination. Although it may feel and sound like it under the law, it is not. The other kind of misconception about the law, and this is the Age Discrimination in Employment Act, which the EEOC is the responsible agency for enforcement, which is really the law you think of when it comes to age discrimination, is that you can be discriminated by somebody who's older than you as well. As long as you're over 40, that discrimination occurs if your boss is 25 years old and being ageist because you're 41, or your boss is 70 years old and doesn't like you because you just turned 50. It doesn't matter. So that's kind of a nuance. Well, how could I discriminate against you because I'm older than you? right? How could it be because of your age? We see that a lot, and that's not the case. The also kind of really super technical nuance in some cases, the laws allow employers to favor older workers even when it adversely impacts younger workers, because again, there's no claim for those younger workers. And for age discrimination, like all of our discrimination laws here, it's important to remember that a lot of people just think it's related to hiring and firing, right? Those are the big categories of where you see general discrimination. Of course, I wasn't hired because of my age, or I was fired because of my age, but it's really in any aspects of your employment. So in addition to hiring, firing, it's your pay, job assignments, promotions, training, benefits, wages, any other terms and conditions of your employment, travel benefits, anything related to the function of your job. If there's any component on it where you're being disfavored because you're over 40, that is age discrimination as well. So, a lot of it gets very detailed once you start to look at what it is. And there's very few exceptions that the law allows for employers being able to discriminate. And you see some state laws that allow, for instance, judges to forced to retire. You see some other federal laws like, in the Federal Aviation Act, some of these other, with transportation where pilots or firefighters have to retire at certain age. There's exceptions to our laws related to certain other laws that say, because you're dealing with health and safety, you have to retire, at this point. So very rarely can you actually say that age is an actual job qualification that we don't want to have an over worker, unless very few exceptions for safety as well. So that's really the main law. The other law is the Older Workers Benefit Protection Act, which also the EEOC enforces. And this law was created to prevent employers from denying benefits to older employees. In addition, if you are being laid off, older workers get more information than younger workers if you're asked to sign a release. And this gets very tricky and complicated because, in the other laws, like, say if you were subject to discrimination because of a pregnancy or a disability, or even sexual harassment in some cases, you can sign a release and it's effective that day. But with the Americans, older workers, and it's a tongue twister. Excuse me. It's the thousands of times.
Really is.
We call it the OWBPA. I don't say it in full, and it's difficult. There's a lot of additional requirements, such as having to understand what the release is saying. You get to see, if it's a reduction in workforce, how many workers in older workers were laid off compared to younger workers, and then you have time to rescind it and see an attorney. So there's just some nuances for older workers as well. So now that I've kind of laid the groundwork of what age discrimination is and isn't, and what the EEOC's responsibility there is, I will now answer your question about, what are the trends in age discrimination. So last year, we received around 14,144 charges alleging age discrimination. Now, that was the third most in the last 5 years. So in 2019, there's around 17,000. 2020 was 15,000. 2021, 13,000. 2022, 12,000. And then it went to this year, which was very close to being 14,000. So you can see, just it bops around in a certain area, not too far off of where the trends are, but we haven't seen like massive spikes like we've seen in some other areas. So fairly consistent in that range. So age discrimination was around 17.5% of all the charges filed. So that's sort of where it ranks related to the intake of what these cases are.
Do you have per industry data on these lawsuits? Are you able to break it down? For example, the tech industry?
You would have to comb through the litigations that we file. Sometimes we do reports, which we'll get to, a report we've done before that puts out, some of the information, but largely the industry-based reporting we do is just at what industries we're bringing cases for. And, last year we filed 12 litigations in the age discrimination context. I can tell you, of the breakdown of what those are, the majority of these cases that we file, the actual litigations, not being hired because of age made up almost 60% of those lawsuits, followed by
interesting.
Discharge, termination, then harassment, failure to promote because of age issues within advertisements, age issues within benefits, age issues with job classifications, age issues with job referrals, and then a couple other, mix and match. So the breakdown of those cases, still the vast majority of them are in the hiring context. But, the age cases can get expensive. And, there's a lot of reasons for that because, if you look at how the damages are broken down about the loss we recovered, a lot of it is based upon salary and how much you're making and how much would you have continued to make if you weren't fired before your age. And, for older workers, they're, largely being paid more in most contexts, of seniority. So in fiscal year 2023, our age discrimination monetary recovery we received, not through the court systems, just in the cases we have in the administrative side. So of those, however, 15,000 plus cases that just pile up every year. Well, when we settle them, we had last year $76.6 million in fines collected for age discrimination. The year before was 70 million. The year before that was 83 million. The year before that was 76 million. So this is a high number. So, although these cases may only be 17, 18% of the amount of charges being filed, the monetary recovery of them tends to be a little higher, for those reasons. So, you can't take this lightly. This is a serious, when these cases are filed and there's recoveries, they're pretty high.
I want to go back to one thing that you mentioned, which was, I think you said that it was 60% of the cases that were filed for age discrimination were about the hiring process. And I find that interesting because my understanding
the ones we
is
filed
that,
in federal court. So the ones that we've taken,
filed,
not necessarily the ones that have come in because they come in everything, but the ones we prioritize to litigate, because we have the internal investigative process and we settle a lot of those, but that can be anything, right? But with the ones we've chosen to actually bring to federal court, are 60% of them are on the hiring side.
Okay. So I find that interesting. And the reason for that is that I understand that age discrimination is the highest standard of proof that is necessary in order to actually have a positive outcome, which is a fascinating subject. And I'd love to talk more about that. But it comes to me as a surprise that there are so many of the cases that are filed on the hiring front, because that would seem to be the most opaque part of all of this, right? As an applicant, you don't know what's happening on the other side in the inner workings of an organization versus being exposed to it as an employee. So I know there was one such case that recently came up that you guys prosecuted about this type of discrimination during the hiring process. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about, why it is that so many of those cases are moved forward by the EEOC and what you're seeing and how they actually become winners, because it does seem like there's a harder standard of proof, right? So
we evaluate them, and a lot of times there's if the EEOC is going to litigate cases, it impacts more than one worker, and I'll give you some examples of those cases. But if we decide to take a case, especially on the hiring side, likely there's going to be pretty bad evidence or statements or direct evidence of hiring practices that are, or forget hiring, just anything related to, being an employee that hurt older workers. So, in that sense, we're going to bring those types of cases where the facts and the law warrant it. And so fact specific in cases, and look, we're charge driven. We can only bring the cases that come in. So, that's what our skill is here, is not only finding the right ones to investigate, but then to actually litigate.
Yeah. And so I imagine you would need kind of smoking gun evidence in a lot of these situations in order to move forward and have a successful outcome, right? So
it's not always, it's tough. A lot of them can be on, either a smoking gun and saying, we don't want to, which I'll give you some examples of, that we don't want to have, older workers, or, here's a policy that we're going to just put in place, but it's going to impact older workers more than other groups. So it's, if we're bringing the case to litigation, and the federal government is actually suing you on an age case or any case, that confident in their position.
Right, exactly. They're not going in there with nothing, right? So, can we talk about one of those cases? I'd love to hear about case that you
So let me give you a
bring
few
up.
examples of some of the larger age cases that we've had. So in December of last year, a medical group agreed to pay the EEOC almost $7 million to settle an age and disability case surrounding the mandatory retirement policies of physicians, regardless of the individual physician's ability to do their job. So, that was a very large case, almost $7 million. And part of that case, in addition to the monetary fines, the company had to rescind its mandatory retirement policy based upon age, and it had to inform all the employees that that the policy that they've had in place, basically making an age a factor, right, not ability to do the job, was unlawful. And a lot of training was done from there. So that's one where the policy was put in place, saying we're having a mandatory retirement policy, and it impacted older workers who still had the ability to do the job. And like I said, outside of certain areas like flying an airplane or something like that, where there's other laws, it's still, you're discriminating on the older workers. If you're just saying point blank, you can't do the job once you hit a certain age, when aging impacts people differently, so it needs to go back on the merits. The next case we had from last year too was almost $2.5 million, and that was a company that denied positions in the company's early career hiring initiative. If you were older, the early career hiring initiative was in place and included goals designed to change hiring preferences to add more millennials to the workforce. That obviously was targeting hiring younger workers over older workers, and calling it early career, things like that. We had evidence on, and so part of the settlement too, in addition to setting up claims for those who were denied those positions, they had to do training across the board, about age discrimination. They had to survey job applicants in the future if they feel like they were being discriminated during that process, during their age, and then work with third-party recruiters to ensure that age played no factor in that. So, in cases like that, when the EEOC comes in, we basically can have to take over your hiring process and for a period of years, and we monitor it and make sure that third parties are doing it right as well. So, those are two like broader policies. It wasn't, one was on the ability, one was on, hey, we just want to diversify with younger workers. And you can't do that. So not as direct as the one I'm going to give you now. So there was one that wound up around $460,000. In our lawsuit, we claimed that under the directions of the new president and CEO who came in 2019, they made plans to systemically eliminate all older management and sales employees and replace them with new, younger workers. The HR director witnessed the CEO making dozens of discriminatory age-related comments about the current and potential employees. The HR director also witnessed that the manufacturer repeatedly turned down qualified older applicants in favor of less qualified younger employees, and forcing upper management employees out of the company under the guise of job eliminations. When the HR director questioned these actions and attempted to educate these executives about U.S. anti-discrimination law, she was fired herself, and then replaced by two. Hold on, it gets better. Replaced by two younger workers in that side. So all of this conduct violates the Age Discrimination and Employment Act. So in addition to the monetary relief there, they had to train all their U.S. employees and managers on age discrimination. They had to distribute policies on age discrimination to all employees. They had to post notices all over the place about age discrimination. And they had to allow EEOC to monitor all age discrimination plates coming in. So imagine being in their HR department and you get an age discrimination complaint from somebody who works there, and then you have to immediately turn it over to the EEOC and have the EEOC be involved in your internal investigation as well.
Doesn't sound like fun. No.
Yeah, I got.
It sounds very impactful.
Right. So I got a couple more for you, because it's really important to hear the facts. So the next one was a tech company that had to pay $700,000. There, we basically in that case found that the company targeted employees who were over 40 in a series of nationwide layoffs. And that was directed by the company's CEO. And look, these two examples where you have testimony from HR departments basically saying that, this was the CEO wanting to do this and we had to implement it as HR employees. And look, these are not one-off cases. These are systemic cases. And you ask about the types of cases we bring when the federal government's using its resources. It's going to be on these larger systemic nationwide cases that impact thousands of current workers or, tons of applicants as well.
Makes sense.
Because that's the power we have, and we have the power to force them to change as well. So, that's where a lot of it comes from. And in the age context, going back to maybe why some of the monetary relief is so high in addition to what they're making, the facts there are bad. And generally, a lot of times there's information that this is for younger workers, not for older workers, or you have HR departments saying that their bosses, their CEOs want to eliminate older workers. So, I mean, in a couple examples, and there's a lot more, that we have on our website that's available about these age discrimination cases we've brought. And, that's a kind of a common theme for the displacement of older workers or just not hiring older workers. There's generally going to be some directive there, versus saying that we want to have a mandatory retirement age because we don't think people can do the job without doing the ability test to do the job. So those are generally the two big buckets of cases we bring, and they're big. I mean, and they affect thousands and thousands of workers nationwide.
Yeah, well, they're really critical. I mean, I think the reality is that we're living in an incredibly ageist society. A lot of people don't even register that age discrimination or being ageist is wrong. And so people bring their authentic, shitty selves to the workplace, and they need to be taught about what is right and what is wrong. And so I think, it's a really compelling part of what the EEOC can do, both through its education and also through leading by example of what not to do in some of these cases, right? Like these companies are being held up as, examples of what can happen if you do not do the right thing. So I think it's absolutely critical to all of us. So.
Yep, absolutely. And that's what we're here for.
Yep. I want to get into AI. Obviously, AI is the buzzword of the day, of the time, really, in the tech industry. And I know that it's had an impact on hiring and within actually all realms of employment. So I want to hear your take on AI in the workplace and how it can impact the hiring and recruitment and retainment of employees of all ages.
Yeah. So obviously, this is the biggest thing, to hit HR in a long time. And there's AI software out there that is, does every A to Z of the employment relationship.
Yeah.
From creating job descriptions to doing the interviews, to sourcing candidates, to selecting the candidates, to determining pay, to determining what assignments you'll get, to even telling employees they're fired. So it's being used across the board. I think, and a lot of the programs are being designed, developed, and deployed for the sole reason of doing it better than humans. Of, if we can eliminate the biggest problem in human resources, which is the human, and replace it with an AI, we'll be able to make unbiased hiring decisions based upon, the algorithm's recommendations that doesn't have bias and won't discriminate. So obviously that's a lot of how
AI. Yeah.
Right. Well, obviously it's not as simple as that. Not as simple as that. It's much more complicated. But look, employers who especially need to hire and quickly and in the job market are largely turning to this software because they have to. And and the risk with this is obviously that if AI discriminates versus a human, the scalability of the discrimination is far greater than any one individual human can do.
Exactly.
And the other issue, especially when it comes to the age context, is the amount of information that these AI tools give talent acquisition and hiring managers that previously wasn't available in a millisecond. So you think like before, if you don't want to hire, let's say, a female for the job, which of course is highly illegal, you would have to take time to discriminate. You have to go through these resumes. Is this a female sounding name? They go to women's college. Are there any indicators are on there? And it would just throw that resume in the trash. Next, takes time. Versus AI where, in a millisecond, you can eliminate millions of applications that the AI can tell if it's a male or female, or even if they can't, tell other characteristics that may indicate that they're part of a protected class. So, and with a few clicks, you can do much more harm than ever before. So, a lot of it is just this additional information. And this is relevant to the age context, where, these algorithms can figure out age categories even by names, by thinking what names were popular during these years. This must be in this category.
That's so true.
If you don't have a your college graduation date on there as well. So just with a few clicks you can eliminate all workers over a certain age. And the difference here is that they don't, the workers aren't aware of it, for a whole host of reasons. But, the most classic example of kind of intentional algorithmic discrimination actually comes in the age context. And it wasn't a case that the EEOC brought. It was a case that the ACLU brought against Facebook and some other large companies. And in that case, they were alleging that, Facebook was allowing employers to go on and using their advertising tool that they would use, let employers use for other products, and that's how they make so much money. You can exactly micro-target to who you exactly want to see.
Exactly who you want.
And then you see, and it follows you all over the internet, versus employment advertisement, which is federally protected, and you can't do things like that. So it was alleged under state anti-discrimination law that large corporations were going in there and limiting it to certain age groups, and limiting entry-level jobs, let's say 20 to 25 years old, opposed to the qualifications on that. And, the people who were not in that age range, right, over 40, who were qualified for the job, that's discrimination against them. And not, the bigger issue there is that they were being withheld the opportunity to even apply for the job based upon their membership in that age group. So think about, civil rights laws and how far they've come. Before, if you've ever seen some of the historical job advertisements before the civil rights laws were enacted, or some of the, pictures in New York City from like the 1930s in black and white that says no Irish need to apply, or like,
it's wild.
It's crazy stuff. If you look up old job description, no female of childbearing years is allowed to apply. And look, there was no rights at the time. There's no civil rights law to say that's illegal. There's no EEOC. However, at least you knew you were being discriminated against based upon your religion, your sex. And if you had civil rights, you'd be able to move. Right. It was all out in the open. We're here, the seriousness of it. You never even knew that opportunity existed on the basis of being in that age group. So you can't even move forward with your civil rights come to the EEOC because that opportunity was withheld to you. So think about the size of these potential cases in that Facebook example. Is that the millions and millions of workers over 40 who were qualified for the job, and all they had to say is that I would have applied for that job. They're potential victims of age discrimination, and the scale of that, is the likes we've never seen before. So you could see, the potential issues there. But look, on the flip side, and I'm very positive on AI because I think there's a lot of benefits to it. AI can help eliminate some of the intentional discrimination, especially older workers have had to deal with for a long time. So think about going in an interview where everything's in Zoom. The first thing you see when you walk into that interview is basically everything the EEOC says you can't make a determination on for hiring. I can see what you look like. I can see if you're pregnant. I can see if you're disabled. I can see if you're older, right? So allowing at least the first round, or even in some cases, the complete interview to be done by artificial intelligence allows those individuals to move forward and actually be graded on the merit of their answer, opposed to not moving forward because you're older. And, the computer can't see that. So that, in a way can really help eliminate some of the egregious intentional bias that we've seen in interviews. So it's not all, with AI, you can't say it's all bad. It's all not all great. It's just, how are you going to use it? What purpose are you going to use it for? And how are you going to comply with these longstanding civil rights laws that apply equally to, companies who use AI to make employment decisions than it does to, using humans. But, within the age context, I think that generative AI has more of a disruption for older workers. And let me tell you why, for two reasons. And I think generative AI is going to have a bigger impact on older workers and discrimination before others, because, when you look at all these layoffs that are going to happen related to generative AI, generative AI can now replace knowledge workers. And how are we going to do that? And how have reduction in workforce has been done historically? Older workers are paid more. So let's just look at who our highest paid workers are and let's lay them off. And if you take that metrics, right, which you can't do to begin with, but, with generative AI, think about that's going to impact older workers, but also, the other side of it is implementation for generative AI and older workers. So you have, and we've started to, there's cases about this in the news, not by the EEOC, that says, I've been doing my job for the same way for 30 years. And the highest producer, get the best performance. And suddenly you're telling me I need to become a prompt engineer to continue doing my job? Well, you're just making this technology so advanced, you just want me to quit. And it's actually what we call a constructive discharge. That's a theory under the law. It's just saying that, well, you weren't fired, but they made it untenable for you to actually just resign or quit. And, that's been an issue we're seeing, is that how this technology is going to be implemented, especially for older workers, for disabled workers. You think about, Gen Z who grew up on their phone and can learn and use ChatGPT, potentially faster than older workers. So there's just a lot of time and care that's necessary for, the implementation of generative AI, or it's going to have that disproportionate impact on older workers, both in the implementation side and on the layoff side.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, I would say at some level, though, I feel like the fact that generative AI is new gives us all a level playing field. Like, it's open season. We can all at any age go and learn how to do it. And I do think that
if there's a trust. If there's workers, old and young, don't believe that this is going to be their robot replacement. If it's implemented saying, well, you're not just trying to lay me off, you're trying to actually help me do my job better, opposed to making it so complicated, that I'm essentially being discriminated against. So a lot of it is in the messaging, how that works.
100%. It's all about how it's put out into practice, for sure. So beyond enforcing the law, what else is the EEOC doing to prevent age discrimination?
Well, we have a lot of guidance in the material, which I'll go over. But in 2018, the EEOC, for the 50th anniversary of the age discrimination laws, we issued the State of Age Discrimination in Older Workers in the U.S. after 50 years of the discriminations. So that law being in place, this was, again, 2018 statistics, but it's just relevant to this conversation. We found that more than 6 in 10 workers age 45 or older have seen age discrimination in the workplace. Of those, 90% say it's somewhat very common. And then another study we found in 2015 showed that more than 3 or 4 older workers said their age was an obstacle on the front end to finding a job. And I know you're interested in this. In this report, we talked about older workers in the technology industry, and that showed significantly high rates of age discrimination, with 70% of those in IT staffing reporting they had witnessed age discrimination or experienced age discrimination themselves. More than 40% of older tech workers were worried about losing their job because of age, and this is way before AI, or considering their ability, age as a limiting ability in their career. So those were some startling statistics from that report, and it's already some time since that report came out. So you see, that's one thing we can do to raise the awareness of, using our ability to survey and look at the charges to bring out those cases. But, more importantly, it allows us to put out strong guidance on there. And in that document and on our website, we have a lot of best practices to prevent age discrimination. And the first and foremost important thing is about the workplace culture. And that, to us, really determines whether workers are valued with regard to their age or devalued based upon their age. And so much is in the leadership of the organization. And look at those cases I gave you. It was the CEO demanding those orders. At the top. And especially now with our multi-generational workplace, it needs to be a place where older workers and younger workers can grow and thrive. And there's so many stereotypes about the ability of older workers to be able to perform in diverse, productive, high-tech, modern society. And, second, we really highlighted, too, that everyone can help prevent age discrimination by recognizing these stereotypes, rejecting these assumptions. And really, what you see a lot in this age context are remarks about older workers about their ability. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, stuff like that, or grandpa, or whatever you want to say.
Yep. Dino.
That jokes may be endearing, but it's actual harassment. It can lead to age discrimination. And you just see a lot of that. And that's the tricky part, is when is it actually turn into a hostile work environment and age discrimination versus not. So, that's really important for us to really talk about and get out there and talk about some of those actual best practices. And then there's a long document we have about the trainings that can be done, about going through the interviewing questions to make sure that the interviewers are not asking about this, such simple things as college graduation dates. So it's really a whole organizational approach. And we have a ton of information and documents relating to that on our website.
What are your thoughts about some of the recent regulations that have come in effect in places like Colorado, where you're no longer allowed to ask on an application for markers of age?
So that is, up to, there's no federal law not requiring you to ask for it or not. But like anything else, the more information you ask, the more that, a candidate who believes that, or an employee who believes they were discriminated based upon their age or any other characteristic is going to point to that. Right. So how relevant is it to the job? And, if you have that information versus not having that information, it's just one less thing they could accuse you of having age discrimination.
Couldn't agree with you more. I've always kind of scratched my head, why would they even ask this? And they say it's for demographic purposes. It's well, what are you doing with this information? And if I go to your website and I see that you clearly don't employ anyone over 40 and you've just asked me my age as I'm applying, this is kind of a head scratcher. Why are you doing this?
Yes, exactly. So, it's up to you. You're allowed to ask that information. It's similar to companies who have asked for photos of candidates. It's not necessarily unlawful, but then you have all that information.
It is stupid.
You're not. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think. Why are these decisions being made? Whose idea was this? It doesn't make sense to me.
So.
Quite odd.
So that's sort of, when you look at state laws changing it, just know, certainly it has an impact for your company if you are going to continue to do things like that. That just may give you more indicators of discrimination. And one final piece of really important guidance we put out, it was our harassment guidance. And we have that came out in April of 2024. We have multiple examples to make it so easy for you about real life situations that have caused age discrimination. And, we try to make them as gory as we can. So if I can take a minute, I'll give you a couple ones that we've said, so your listener can actually hear real life situations. So example 16 in our guidance, Lulu, age 68, is a makeup artist and salesperson at a department store. Lulu's managers repeatedly asked Lulu about her retirement plans, despite Lulu expressing that she had no interest in retiring. Lulu's manager also tells her that the brand needs fresh faces and high energy. When Lulu makes even a minor mistake, her manager disparages Lulu for having senior moments. Further, on other occasions, the manager snapped at Lulu, says, "Nobody wants makeup advice from their granny." So based on these facts, the manager's harassing conduct towards Lulu is based upon her age, obviously, and is based on age discrimination. So pretty simple example, but these are, things we see. Another one, Henry, age 62, is a consultant at a professional services company. Ryan, his supervisor, calls him old man on periodic basis. Since Henry's 60th birthday, Ryan has repeatedly asked him when he plans to retire. He says he can't wait to bring in young blood and fresh ideas. During a recent staff meeting, Ryan reminded the staff to get their flu shots and then looked at Henry and said, "Although I wouldn't be heartbroken if the flu took out some of our old timers." Henry asked Ryan if he was referring to him, and Ryan said, "Absolutely, old man." Henry reports feeling targeted and ashamed by Ryan's comments. Based on these facts, Ryan has subjected Henry to objective hostile work environment based upon age. So
case closed.
Yeah. And then one final one, because these are always, it's so important for people to hear how egregious this kind of stuff is.
People think
and
it's
this
all
is
right.
a concept I talked about before, is that interclass harassment based on age. So here, Pedro, age 65, is a salesperson in a furniture store. Pedro's supervisor, Simon, age 52, became dismissive of Pedro. After Pedro asked to use some personal leave, Simon denies Pedro, saying you're old and you're not taking the day off. After that, Simon stops referring to Pedro by name and calls him old man and pops. Simon also refers to Pedro as over the hill. But Simon is almost as old as Pedro. So what do we do here? It's just, two older workers going at it. This is so important that it's still age discrimination, even though Simon is also an older worker as well. So you can kind of see that employees may not think that it's age discrimination because the person is older than I am or my same age. So I think it's a really important part that I wanted to bring up to ensure that that point is out there.
Well, I hope people don't need to go do this, but if people are facing age discrimination at their workplaces, where should they go? What's the next step for them?
Well, I mean, first of all, depending on the corporations, this is why it's important for HR departments to have policies that address these issues. And if you feel like you're being discriminated, not just for age, but for any reason, that you can go to HR and you can file a complaint and HR will investigate it without any retaliation against your employment, no matter if it's actual discrimination or not. So that should be the first step. If that doesn't work, obviously, the employees can file charges of discrimination at any of our 60 local offices, wherever you are. All this information on how to file an EEOC charge is available at eeoc.gov with steps in the process. So
amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all this information with the audience today. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for raising awareness of this very important issue.